Crime stats are trending downward. For instance, murders were down nearly 10% in 2014, but it feels like there has been a rash of carjackings lately, especially at gas stations in the city.
Yeah, right now, in fact, police in Detroit are searching for two violent carjackers. Here's some video, one right here, caught on camera. The video shows the suspects forcing their victims out of the car at gunpoint. This one happened in broad daylight Sunday afternoon at a gas station near Greenfield and 6 Mile. Police believe the suspects are behind at least 3 other carjackings and robberies.
Joining us now to talk about this is Detroit Police Chief James Craig and U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuaid. Thanks to both of you so much for joining us. Chief Craig, let's start with you if we can today. We have been reporting on a lot of these carjackings recently. Any advice that you have for people who are filling up at gas stations in the city?
Just be aware of your surroundings. You know, I've been... You know, when you look at the crime of robbery, carjacking, it certainly drives a lot of fear in our community. And while statistically we are showing a decline in carjackings both this year and significantly last year, but our work continues. You know, our gas station owners are working with us. I know this is an initiative that's something that's near and dear to the mayor. So we believe we're going to continue to drive that crime down. And the key is making those arrests and putting those who perpetrate this violence in our community. That's the key.
Ms. McQuaid, also recently we've heard a lot of people using guns to defend themselves against all sorts of types of crimes, including carjacking. I know the chief in the past has been fairly complimentary of that tactic. Do you agree?
Well, I'm not going to give citizens advice about what to do when they're confronted with that situation, but what I really want to do is prevent them from being in that situation in the first place. Through this Violence Reduction Network, we're trying to bring best practices, additional police officers, additional funding to Detroit so that we can give people the kind of public safety that all of us deserve.
Chief, are you on board with that same idea?
Well, of course. You know, I've never said just arm everyone. What I have said is that a responsible Detroiter who's been trained, who has gotten a concealed weapon permit, when confronted with an imminent threat to their life or the life of another, they need to be protected. You know, I oftentimes say, I don't care what city we talk about, whether it's Los Angeles, Cincinnati, now Detroit, police officers cannot be on every corner, every minute of the day. It's just not realistic. But the key is that working in partnership with our community, we are driving crime down, working in partnership with our federal, other municipalities, the county, we're getting the job done. And in fact, statistically, we have seen fewer self-defense shootings this year than we saw last year.
Ms. McQuaid, let's talk a little bit more about this Violence Reduction Task Force. It's comprised of these 10 cities. Ultimately, how much of a difference do you think it can make in cities like Detroit?
Well, we think it's very beneficial to bring to Detroit the best practices, the best researchers, the best evidence about what's working in other cities and bring that home to Detroit. We've been working on this program for the past year, for example, and one of the projects we identified that we wanted to work on was reducing domestic violence homicides. And by taking best practices from other cities and using data analysis, as we've now been trained to do, we saw a 35% reduction in domestic violence homicides. So I think it's making a real difference to bring those all those assets here to Detroit.
What are some of those best practices? You mentioned the homicides and domestic violence. Can you get specific about something you're bringing here and talking about?
Well, grant dollars, for one, to equip police officers with body cameras. Another is learning how to exploit social media. Gangs use social media to communicate, to brag, to threaten each other. We've utilized that training now, and just last week we brought a big gang prosecution against a violent street gang who was using social media in that way. So using this technology and smart policing to do a more efficient job of policing, I think will help in the long run to make us all safer.
Now, Chief, she talked about the grants. As part of this program, you got some $10 million in grants. How are you putting that money to work in this umbrella program?
Well, for one, you know, the great news is we're looking at body camera deployment throughout the department. And certainly I'm committed, as well as the mayor. We understand, you know, that's a key initiative when you talk about enhancing transparency. So that's one initiative. Secondly, the hiring of additional police officers. We're excited about the hiring of additional police officers so that we can put them out in those neighborhoods to respond to those emergency calls for service. You know, it's no secret that right now, when you look at our response time year to date, we have cut response time on priority calls for service over half, and that's great news. But again, we are excited about the opportunity to put more officers in the field as part of our initiative, and I know the mayor and I have had countless conversations on how we can bring and put more officers in the field. We're looking at our restructuring effort, and part of that is putting police officers out in the field that are now working in what could be best held by a civilian employee, like our dispatch center.
Ms.
Historically, Detroit has always had...
Go ahead, Chief.
I'm sorry.
Go
No, I was
ahead.
just talking about our dispatch center, how historically they've been staffed by police officers, when we know a best practice in many major cities is that civilians do that job, and that's just more police officers in the field.
Ms. McQuaid, let's look past this program. What would you like to see that goes even a step farther than this?
Well, we can always use additional resources, additional police officers, and equipment to bring that home here to Detroit. So I'm hopeful. One of the things that the Violence Reduction Network has brought to us is training on grant writing, and also making sure we are aware of all the grant opportunities that are available. The Department of Justice gives out over $4 billion a year to police departments across the country, and we want to make sure that we are well positioned to take advantage of that so that we can bring home all of those resources to Detroit.
All right, Chief James Craig, thank you so much. U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuaid, thank you both for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.